I would say that like the two biggest things that people can take away is transparency and proactivity. So if you gather those data points and you can present them in a manner that does give a timeline and they can proactively think on their end, what does this look like for me as the franchisee? I think that it makes a world of a difference, not only in the Frando sales pipeline, but like you said, those continued relationships of building more out.
Cait Grabowski, thank you so much for joining me today on RevOps Champions.
Hi, Brendon. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. So, Cait, I'm gonna dive right in. So, as a RevOps and CRM expert that strategically approaches business from the perspective of a CRO from your past, what are currently the biggest opportunities you're seeing for franchises specifically as they invest in the systems and processes that'll help them scale?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's endless opportunity there, right? But to start, it's just really interesting because you see models in the sense of not only are you supporting the franchise itself and how they want to sell out their own units, but it then takes it to another level of, are you hitting your consumer, and or do you have a real estate and legal team that also needs processes in place? And when you have something like HubSpot that can connect to so many different third party um, solutions, if you will, depending on the vertical that we're working with, it's a nice place to have a center source of truth for all of the teams to come to and be able to see their data.
hmm So, yeah, and I agree. I mean, there seem to be endless opportunities, and I've had some really good conversations just in the last few weeks again with people who really understand the franchise industry and see these opportunities. But let's quickly switch over then to what do you see currently as the biggest obstacles to why franchises might not be prioritizing or investing in these systems that are possible to help them scale?
Sure. Sometimes I think they're just not even aware of them, right? Because there are so many solutions out there that trying to find one that can embrace all of them is a really unique opportunity that's maybe not as marketed as it should be nowadays. So you do always have kind of piecemeal portions of a franchise company. Like I said before, you have real estate, you have your franchise development, and then you have your consumer side to all of those units that you're trying to build out. Are you getting the right people in the door to actually spend the money in your franchises? So the opportunity to work with something such as HubSpot, where you can have everybody kind of coming to that one center place for information and it's the truth, is an endless opportunity to grow from there.
hmm So you've touched now on a couple of things where most well-run franchise organizations have they approach the market from a different perspective, and you've now talked about they typically have a real estate team who helps their franchisees identify the right types of first of all areas, locations based on all kinds of demographic information, etc. Which is a very specific skill set that team runs. But then they really have to work very closely with the franchise development team
Mhm.
for the cool folks that the Fran Dev team, um, and then who are the folks that are helping to bring franchisees on board. Um, and again, in each of those, we see them making they have different opportunities, and we see them making different mistakes. But then the last I guess part of that is how does a franchisor or a franchise brand support those franchisees once they become a franchisee and part of that family and community, which is so attractive in the franchise industry. um, do you do you see any sort of specific opportunities within either of those three areas, whether it's the real estate team, the Fran Dev team, or then helping franchises be more effective at reaching customers to really grow their own franchises?
Yeah, absolutely. So all three can be helped with solutions such as HubSpot, right? So the unique piece of it is that all three teams are working within the same solution. And at the same time, they're gathering data about a million different properties, right? So you're talking about real estate development. We're getting locations, we're getting franchise units spun up, and all of it's able to be associated to each other and to that franchisee, right?
Hmm.
On top of that, maybe they have three locations and they only have to sell one of them. That data can be put in for another person that wants to open, right? It doesn't
Hmm.
go away, it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. Everything is kind of stored in one unique place. On top of that, when you want to start helping your consumer side, right? So a franchise unit opens, there's data all over the place within the CRM, whether it comes from FranDev, real estate, even legal and compliance. They're gathering dates and people's information and all of this good stuff that when a franchise unit does open, you can use these filters and these lists to say, hey, here's 100 people that have shown interest in marketing, right? From the brand, the high brand level that want to be a part of something. Maybe start there. And it gives them a leg up to begin their process when they open up their own franchise unit location. So I think that's a really interesting feature within something like HubSpot of collecting from multiple verticals in order to support each other.
Right. So, Kate, so let's. I mean, I know that that's kind of the stuff that you're helping, franchise brands figure out and work on every single day. But if you were able to sort of zoom up to sort of, let's say, 50,000 feet and look at the franchise from the highest possible sort of strategic level, um, what what are some of the things that you're seeing, and you don't need to mention any names or whatever,
Sure.
but what are some of the sort of the common mistakes that you see being made at a strategic level? So, as an example, there was one that seems to be coming up every week now for the last few weeks. That's also come up on the podcast, and I was on another podcast last week, talking about franchises, and one of the ones that you've already touched on was where the Fran Dev team, for example, they think that getting franchisees who will commit to 3, 4, 5 units right from the get-go before they've even proven that they can work with one,
Hmm.
or make one location or unit successful. That seems to be like a bit of a strategic miss, on the part of a lot of franchises. But whether it's that example, or do you see other strategic um, missteps that franchises might be making?
Yeah, I would say that I'm in agreement with that, that's probably the biggest like failure rate you would see is because people take on more than they're aware of. Everything sounds good in the sales process and you're excited and that's great. And that means you have an awesome Fran Dev team that's utilizing their systems to make the sale, right?
Hmm.
Super important part of the process. But when people are biting off more than they can chew, maybe to begin with, there's a lot of things that can be tracked in the meantime in maybe like a piloted version, right? Let's do one. And if you meet these metrics, let's talk about two and three for next year.
Right.
I think when people start to say, every year you have to open one for the next 5 years, it becomes more of a challenge to track. And it becomes a challenge for the owner of that franchise unit to have to keep building year after year new locations, going through that process with real estate and legal every year over and over again in order to secure them. And on top of that, trying to make sure that the consumer base is coming to the ones that are open.
Right. Right. Because another thing that seems to be very, again, common knowledge for those in the franchise space, and whether you use the Minneapolis St. Paul metro as an example, or you use the Chicago metro as an example, it's very common for a franchise brand to try and find one franchisee to take up five units to kind of cover the whole circumference of that metro. But which, like, to your point, it sounds like a really smart thing to do. But if that franchisee fails, or if they don't see the success that was promised to them, up front,
Right.
they're they they have the rights to the other four units, but they're never going to open the other 4 units if the first unit wasn't successful, which means that no one else is going to be, opening the other 4 units, which means that that market is just kind of completely dead to that franchise until they come to a different agreement. Um, is that I mean, do you see that as something that you're seeing, or what would you advise, I guess, franchisors who think that way, and what could they do differently?
Yeah, I think my first piece of advice would be align, from a RevOps standpoint, align all of these different verticals, make sure that your data is overlapping when it comes to, okay, we sold the franchise unit for X amount of dollars. What are we looking for on a return there? Are they meeting these metrics over monthly or quarterly basis? Like have those KPI conversations. A lot of the time, again, people bite off more than they can chew. The more that you can direct these folks that are opening the franchise units and give them goals and metrics to meet, the better it's going to be for everyone.
Mm.
You have your standards, you can see how they're tracking against those, and it gives them a goal. It gives them something to work towards. So I think that reporting is a huge, sometimes a misalignment. So when you do utilize your systems, maybe you have reporting on one solution and on the other. And when you're not overlaying that data, you're missing a lot of gaps there. So it's really important that everybody has the same goals, you're measuring in the same way, and that you can also review that again, monthly, quarterly, whatever it may be, to see it's the same thing as sales, right? How are you tracking towards these goals? It's almost the end of the year and we have to make up for something. How will we do that, right? Look at your book of business. It's the same idea as what brand dev does to get them in the door that the franchise units then have to do to be producing strongly on their end as well.
Mm. Yeah, you raise a really good point, which I also, yeah, this is a challenge, I think, in many industries, but I think the franchise industry is definitely not immune to this, and that is the example you just gave now of when, let's just say it's the Fran Dev team. They started a year with the goal of, selling 20 or 25 or 50 units, and they're short. I guess the question that I would ask again strategically is having goal, like 1 year goals, is that maybe short? I mean, obviously you have to have goals, annual goals, because that's how salespeople are incentivized.
Mhm.
But I just seem to find pretty frequently that a lot of franchise brands are not playing enough of the long game.
Yeah.
So I mean, to me, that's like one of the built-in values of a franchise brand, is the fact that it has legs, because you have, this is, if you have, whether it's 100 units or 200 units or whatever it is, you have anywhere from, 10 to 50 entrepreneurs who become your partners and will grow the business with you. That, to me, that seems like something that people want to do for 15, 20, 25 years or more. So making decisions based on short-term goals just seems to be a bit of I guess, a disconnect for me.
Yeah, and I agree to an extent. So I would think that it's almost like when we talk about EOS, right? And that whole system is like, what's a rock, right? Like it's different types of goals. So when I'm talking KPIs, we're just looking at the numbers. We need to hit certain numbers in order for it to be profitable. Like, where are we? Because I think a lot of the time people struggle on long term goals because they're either really grandiose or they're not being checked in on enough.
Hmm.
And that's something that I've noticed a lot in startups is we say, what is, a 1 year plan? What's a 3 year plan? And what's a 5 year plan? And I think a lot of the times the 3 year and the 5 year KPIs, goals, metrics, whatever you want to call them, get counted out on those monthly meetings, on those quarterly meetings. And it's something that people
Hmm.
have to make sure that they're making a point to say, we're still trending in that direction. Success isn't built overnight, right? But what are the small milestones that you can hit in order to reach that goal in 5 years for that level of success?
Yeah, yeah. Which leads me to another thing that seems to be popping up all the time, which is a signal that a franchise brand is not thinking strategically. Is you can have a conversation with them, and it doesn't matter whether the conversation is 5 minutes or an hour or more. at the end of it, it always comes down to. So I was in a conversation last week with a franchise marketing company who sent this to me, where you can have a conversation for an hour with a franchise brand, and at the end of it they say, yeah, but how many leads are you going to get me? And it's like everything is so transactional. And
Sure.
so again, it's which is another sort of signal that they're not taking a long-term view. And I'm not quite I don't know what the obstacles are that they keep defaulting to this sort of very short-term view of just get leads, get franchisees, and then all our problems will be solved. Which we know that if you don't support your first 5 or 10 franchisees, the chances of success are a lot lower, because
Hmm.
they are the ones who will start a second, a third, or fourth, or fifth, and they are the ones who will tell their friends and family, this is an awesome franchise, you should get 1 or 2 units yourself, and they can actually share their KPIs and successes. Anyway, there just seems to be there's a disconnect between what's possible and then the actions. Like, I think your example of EOS is a really good one, where you got to plan for the long term, but then you have to execute for the short term. But your KPIs and metrics have to be aligned. Where and it's they're not necessarily thinking about lifetime value of
Right.
a franchisee or of the final customer. Because again, if the franchisee is able to if you can take care of the franchisee, and the franchisee can take good care of their customers, I mean, then the entire brand can only continue to be more successful, right?
Absolutely.
Um, so on the data and reporting component that you touched on, which again, it seems really obvious that the reason you have data and reporting is so that you can make better decisions, right? As a company, whether you're a franchise brand or a franchisee or any kind of business, what do you see as being the most common metrics used in the franchises that you work with? And do you see potential for any other metrics maybe that they should be using that they're not?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And I have some really great people I've worked with. And one that's really shocking to me that I don't think about very often is the time. So I am, I always make the joke, a classically trained sales rep. So my KPIs are always money, money, money. How fast can we get it?
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to think about the time to build these locations, right? The money, the time, what's our turnaround? All of those data points have to be tracked on top of just, let alone we're selling franchise units. That's great. We're opening one every year with this individual. That's great. Those are easy to track, right? It's
Hmm.
supposed to make X amount of dollars. Where are we tracking to? Again, all very easy to track. What's
Yeah.
not easy to track is all of the other people that are working towards the same goal, and how much time that takes and how many individuals it takes to do that. So I think that's been a really interesting part. And again, when you layer these solutions, a CRM with a project management tool, and you're giving visibility both to the sales rep who sold it, the real estate developer that's working on it, and then that entire real estate team that is working through a project plan. You're now able to gather those data points and say, if I handed this off, how long does it take to get these contracts back? Once
Hmm.
the contract's back, how long does it take for us to present real estate locations to them?
Hmm.
Could we start that earlier, right? Could we start looking earlier in our sales process to let the real estate team know, let's get a couple locations going? So I think that's a really unique portion of data that isn't talked enough about, is the timing of all of it and how much that costs you.
Yeah. Which I'm guessing timing is also kind of related to transparency, right?
Yep.
Which again, for I think for any franchise to be successful, they're going to they're relying on new first time franchisees to come into partnership with them. And the more transparent they can be on the timing, and why the timing is what the timing is. So whether it's 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, whatever it is, that they have the data to back it up to say, well, the reason it takes
Yeah,
that amount of time is because you need this much time for build out, you need this much time for this much time for that. That seems to be one of the things where, again, coming back to what we were talking about earlier about, when the fran dev salesperson is, and of course the franchise is super happy that they've sold, 5 units to one new franchisee. That's great. But if they haven't been transparent about what success looks like for that first unit, the second, third, fourth, and fifth aren't going to happen, right?
absolutely. Yeah, I would say that like the two biggest things that people can take away is transparency and proactivity, right? So if you gather those data points and you can present them in a manner that does give a timeline, and they can proactively think on their end, what does this look like for me as the franchisee? I think that it makes a world of a difference, not only in the Fran Dev sales pipeline, but like you said, those continued relationships of building more out.
Yeah, yeah. Because you'd think, yeah, you're right. Proactivity. I mean, it's hard to have transparency without proactivity, and the more of both of those that you have, you would think the more successful everybody will be because you're taking a lot of the guesswork out of the decision.
Right.
Um, which, again, for a lot of first time franchisees, I mean, this is, they're investing, pretty much a big chunk of what they've saved, in their lives thus far, and they want to make sure that they're sort of backing the right horse, as it were. And so the more transparent and proactive you are, I think the more successful you'll be, right?
Definitely. And that goes for both sides of the coin, right? It's both sides being transparent, proactive, and matching that with data. It's an unstoppable force. You only find that friction when there isn't that transparency and there isn't timelines and you can't have the right people ready at the right time. So
Hmm.
using solutions that kind of automate a lot of that for you based on the activity of your sales team or your real estate team or your legal team, that takes out the friction between emails back and forth, meetings that need to be had. You can check some more boxes and move things along a little bit quicker that are standard.
Hmm. Right, right. Okay, so Cait, bringing it back to sort of the systems that are used either by the franchise brand or the franchisees. This was, I guess, a challenge for a long time. But as these systems have become so much more powerful, but also at the same time easier to use,
Hmm.
they just become more accessible to franchisees who before were limited to using systems that were very basic and didn't really give them everything that they needed to connect and satisfy their customers and grow their business. Um, Now it seems to be we're I think we're in a much better place from a franchise business perspective where you do now have systems that the same system that can be used by the franchisor and the franchisees, and the data can flow all the way up and all the way down with, again, with certain gates. So for example, if a franchise is in a particular region, they don't need to market to people that are 1,000 miles away, and all these systems now give you the possibility and the option to do that. So everybody has access to the data that they need to make the best decisions. I guess what have you seen in the last couple of years as that has become possible? Like, again, what sort of opportunity does that open for franchise brands?
Sure. And I mean, I could go on forever about this one, but I love the customization, right? That is what is giving the power back to the franchises, or the holding companies that are doing these franchises. Is they are able to bring in data from other solutions. They are able to map their data that they've been working out of spreadsheets in for years into something that's a powerful resource and tool, like you said, from top to bottom, from bottom to top.
Hmm.
All of it is just in one spot, but it's unique to their business models. So it's
Yeah.
not necessarily a rinse and repeat because all of them are wildly different, but there's a lot that you can take from each client I've worked with that can also give a recommendation to another on how to improve their processes, because franchise companies have not had great systems to work out of. They're really, really piecemeal. They're really hard to report on. And I think that that's probably been a challenge for a really long time. So we've seen clients just be extremely happy having one spot for everyone to log into. You can set up permissions, but again, you can do that layered reporting. You can look at specific zones. You can look at specific amounts of money that you're trying to make and market against timelines. I just think that the tools never existed for these type of companies before. And I will actually say every single client I've ever had in franchise building has come from spreadsheets. So they
Mhm.
might have like some sort of a limited CRM, but they don't even trust those CRMs to track their information. They trust their spreadsheets more, which is quite telling. So I think like the turn of the tide has come to customizing these solutions for them to make sense of their business. So that's a really, really key portion.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is where, you've mentioned HubSpot a few times. I think this is where HubSpot has done a particularly good job, and they've almost, they've sort of become famous for, is the fact that they've built one of the most powerful platforms that exists, but it's also one of the easiest platforms
Yeah.
out there. So that combination of the power to customize, but also the ease to use is so critical, because for and again, in any industry, and the franchise industry is no different, the number one factor, of course, for the lack of success of a CRM is the fact that people don't use it once it's been implemented. Why do you think that that's something that hasn't happened at a bigger scale than what HubSpot's been able to achieve?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One, again, going back to my sales rep history, is time, right? Time for a sales rep is everything. I want to spend my time with clients. I don't want to spend my time doing administrative work.
Hmm.
If the solutions were made to what my day looks like and how I would be filling things out, I would fill everything out. So it's
Yeah.
like it comes back to that customization of what does your sales rep's day look like? What information are they grabbing at each point in their sales process versus I need to see all of this data right now and you have to fill it out every day at the end of the day. They won't do it,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So making requirements on only very specific milestones or timelines or dates that another portion of the company needs, great, make those things required, but don't require so much that it's death by a thousand paper cuts for your reps, right? You want to make sure that you build it again in the way that they log in for the day, they know what their tasks are, they know what they need to fill out at each stage in the sales process, like really ironing that out and then matching that with a custom solution makes for the best ease of use I've seen for sales reps.
Yeah. So you're touching on a really, I think, critical point, that leaders in all industries make the mistake, because HubSpot, like many other software companies, their sales and marketing is second to none, right? it
Hmm.
is it is incredible,
Yep.
to the point where people like me, who have shiny object syndrome, will buy these tools prematurely, because we think that the tool can actually do more than what it does. And what I mean by that is, you've mentioned it a couple of times now. First of all, every franchise business is different,
Hmm.
the same way that every business in every other industry is different, um, because of their processes are different, their goals are different. Everything is, which means that the software has to be customized to
Hmm.
their specific processes and data requirements, etc., and for the teams that they have. What what are the things that, and because and where this shows up, and because we often, as we will get called in to fix systems where a business has tried to set it up themselves,
Sure.
where, because somewhere along the line they figured out that moving from their spreadsheets to, let's say, the HubSpot CRM, um, it has to be better. But they figure, well, because HubSpot just seems so amazing, they can set it up themselves. But of course, they've never done it before, right? And we all know what happens when you're doing something for the first time. It doesn't always go so well. So, but for the folks listening, uh, who do think that they could potentially do it themselves, like what are some of the key things you think they should be doing or thinking about as they try to customize the HubSpot CRM for their own business?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times there's really like some fundamental basics with HubSpot, and even their academy will point you to those if you take any of those lessons. They've also done a great job. I feel like I'm pitching HubSpot right now, but they've also done a great job of putting in like short clips. So if you just want to know how to build a certain report, maybe it's a 3 to 7 minute video instead of an 8 hour course, right?
Mhm.
So I think a lot of those things are super helpful in that standpoint, but it really comes down to I see a lot of clients that come, we're ready to build a solution. They don't have their internal processes down. So I think a lot of the times the teams really need to connect with each other and on what their goals are before they even start, right? So do we want marketing in here? Do we want service? Do we want sales? Do we want to start with one, see how that goes, and roll it into another phase?
Mm.
I've seen people do it all differently, right? Maybe if you have a large organization, they're ready to do 3 hubs at a time. But I ask that they come prepared, right? I have worksheets for them explaining, like, do you know what does your sales cycle look like? Do you know how long each stage is? Do you know what you want that to look like? Do we want to start tracking against our goal to shorten that by 90 days?
Yeah.
Do you know where your bottlenecks are?
Mm.
Those are all the things that go into play when I start as a solution architect developing that, right? Is
Mhm.
where do we want those triggers to call something out and say, this deal hasn't moved in 14 days. That's a problem for us. Those are the things that are really hard to call out in very like minimal CRMs or in your spreadsheets. That data is super hard to draw. So I would say like making sure that you have standards for your objects for contacts, companies, and deals, understanding your customer buyer journey and your life cycle stages and lead statuses. Um, those are the basics of HubSpot. And I just always say you can build HubSpot forever. So building a really strong skeleton, having the bones where you can go off in different directions, start integrating with other solutions, whatever it might be. Having the strong foundation is where you start. Don't overwhelm the system with too much to begin with.
Mm.
Once it gets messy, it's hard to unravel. So, and HubSpot does a great job also with giving you like folders. So, organization, making sure that you have naming conventions for each portion of the project. So, there's actually quite a bit of work that goes into preparing to start building HubSpot. So if you are to do it alone, I would say like build that documentation out before you get into the system and go from there.
Yeah, I think that's really really good advice. Kate, I think another thing, sort of as we sort of begin to wrap up here, that might be really helpful for the folks listening is, so when you customize and build the hub, HubSpot CRM and integrate it with whatever other systems a franchise is using in this case. You're typically your team is typically 3 or 4 people who have different sets of capabilities and expertise. Um, so again, for those franchises who are trying to figure this out themselves, what are the sort of 3 to 4 different skill sets and people that they should consider having on their team for that CRM to be successfully not just implemented, but then but that in a way that they can continuously optimize it over time as the business continues to evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. So from like a build standpoint, having a HubSpot solution architect, someone that really understands the system that you're building out to begin with is great, especially when they have a background in either sales or marketing, because they tend to listen to what is the user doing, right?
Mhm.
Because there's always the twofold of what does leadership want to see from this? We're spending money on it, and the sales rep having to use it or the marketing folks having to use it. So, what does that ease of use look like as you build out to make sense for both sides of the coin there? Then I would also have an engineer on there. So if you do have to do integrations, HubSpot's actually a really great tool to use for integrations for different software. So having a technical person join just to make sure that automations are correct, that the integrations are working, data is flowing back and forth properly between different solutions. Always great to have one of those folks. And then obviously if it's a very large project, an implementation manager that's keeping everybody kind of on track, right? And they're the person that says this needs to be done by this date so that we can go into the next phase. Because a lot of the time, and when I have clients, I joke and I say, I'm going to lock you out of the system until we're done building those bones, right? Because
Uh-huh.
if you have people in there that are, oh, I know how to build a workflow now, or I know how to change what I want my view to look like, they might not know that they're changing the entire system or they're changing an entire process. So to have kind of that leadership from an implementation manager or a project manager standpoint, I think is like incredibly important for these projects.
Right. And I guess based on what you were saying at the end there, I guess the maybe the other component they should be thinking about is the training piece.
Yes, how could I forget? The training is incredibly important for adoption. So, a lot of the times, especially with the way that I work, we again account for in our architecture what does the user see on a daily basis now? Because it's not that you want to change everything they're doing, you still want their days to be easy and the solution to be adopted. But to have a trainer come in with a change management kind of what's going to happen over this project timeline? What can you expect from us? This changed this week. This will be happening next. And then also working through user acceptance testing to prove everything you've built with those different teams, marketing, sales, service, whoever it be. I think having the trainer coming in before that or during that time to really speak to what has been built out makes for incredible adoption.
Yeah, yeah, because I think that the training piece again, well, goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Like adoption is the most important metric for measuring the
Yep.
success of a CRM, right? So I think the training component. I think the other thing that I've seen like good trainers um, do that I couldn't imagine like ever doing a project again without a trainer because they just have this uncanny ability to explain to people at every level the why, which again is another thing that is often skipped by leaders. And I know it's hard. It's really hard to communicate why you're doing something because you're just so excited to get the benefit of it. But if you don't explain the why and the how and the what after, of course, to everybody who is going to be using this system, then chances are it's not going to be as useful and as valuable as it could be.
Absolutely. And I had a good example this week of a project that needed a little bit of a push to finish a portion of it. And as soon as we demoed and walked through like the why, like this is built to make this easier on your day to day. We're now going to be ingesting all of their data for 2025 for them because they were so excited to see how that would change their working day versus this is a new solution. I don't need to change my day to day. Why is this happening? We were able to show them really what they're going to get the benefit out of it with. And I think that that's just a testament to the training and to the demos that those trainers give.
Yeah, which again, I mean, like, what a great example of like who doesn't want their day to look better like
Yeah.
forever going forward, right? Versus having to spend an hour and a half every day doing like the hard stuff that you have to do if you don't have a good system in place. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cait, okay, so as we wrap up here, any sort of last words of advice you'd like to leave, and I think let's speak specifically to sort of franchises that are in a place where they know that they need to set up a system to allow them to scale more effectively and efficiently. What closing thoughts do you have for them?
Yeah, I would say align your teams, right? Every team has a purpose. So make sure your Fran Dev team has that data sending to real estate in order to be successful to find those locations. And after that, make sure marketing has all that detail in order to supply that new franchise unit with the necessary materials or lists of people that maybe are on a wait list or want to join their franchise, be a part of it, whatever that might be. But develop a solution that takes all your verticals into one place, collecting that data and dispersing it where it's needed. That's really, really important.
That's really good advice. And I think as you were saying that, I another thought came to me which I have to ask you, and that is, so what have you seen, or and if you haven't, that's fine. But I've just heard some really cool stories about a franchise families or communities around a particular brand. Do you, have you seen any particular franchises recently that are doing really cool things to bring their franchisees and their internal teams together to sort of continue to grow their brand together?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I've worked with somebody in the past that they were being helpful in the sense of giving everybody their own instance of HubSpot, but we were able to actually bring them all into one instance of HubSpot now, right? So
Mm,
we're migrating the data from these other portals where they were supporting these franchisees that are opening. But then when they realize how much they can do with just one portal and all of the data in one spot, that's where that change is coming. And now their franchisees have that change management, have that training, and there's going to be like 150 new people in one portal, just loaded with great data and automations to make their days easier. Have a working CRM and not something that's a little Frankenstein because they didn't have
mm.
a company or somebody spinning that up for them. So you see the challenge in all of those 10 portals being wildly different from each other and wildly different from the one that we've created. So it's really fascinating to see that change happen. And I think it's going to be incredibly beneficial for the company.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point because I think there might be some people listening who, in the franchise space who might have checked out, HubSpot say 3 or 4 years ago, and it just wasn't a good option for them.
Definitely totally
Which,
different now.
even though, and even and many of those still went ahead, and to your point, they had one HubSpot instance set up for the franchise, and then they were able to do, different instances for all the franchisees. But to your point, and I think that's a good call out, is that now you can have all the franchisees and the franchise all in one HubSpot instance with their new multi-account management option.
Yeah, and to round that thought out, like another portion that I love about HubSpot as a system is something as simple as using the HubSpot forms, right, to gather data from either potential franchisees or from the consumer side. Maybe they filled out, the wrong location. They said Rhode Island, but they're in Chicago. When you're in one instance, that can change, and then we can still utilize that person somewhere else. It's not stuck in a siloed portal, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think that's another huge bonus of being under one. You can always set permission sets, you can always build your teams out, but sharing that data is just like incredibly beneficial for these franchisees.
Yeah. And there are probably, dozens of other examples of, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Cait, well, thanks so much for joining me today. There was a lot of good stuff in there, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to get a lot of value from what we've talked about here today. So thanks again,
Oh, good, of
and
course.
I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me.